Nixport breathes in gaps of time, a city perched between realities where skylines flicker and bend like heat mirages and clocks melt into the sidewalks, dripping minutes onto the street as if time itself has caught a fever. Neon braids along the avenues pulse in and out of existence, as if the city isn't sure which pulse belongs to it. The rain that shouldn't exist falls downward in spirals, brushing shoulders with people who remember different mornings than the ones they're living. In Nixport, memory and moment are perimeters, and to cross them, you need a map and a knife. Ezra moves through this city as a rumor moves through a crowded bar, mostly unseen, but you can feel him in the air. A suggestion that something valuable sits just beyond a turn of the street. He's tall and lean with the kind of quiet that tolerates knives and storms, not because he's fearless, but because fear is a currency he can't afford to spend. His eyes, gray and bright with a stubborn cynicism, keep a ledger of every price paid to keep time honest, or as honest as it can be when time is a heistable commodity. Rana keeps her distance from the shadows, not because she fears them, but because shadows keep their own counsel. She's a reality engineer, which means she doesn't just study the leaks in time. She patches them with careful geometry and calmed nerds. She wears a coat that seems woven from night itself, a seam here that hums with a soft electric blue, a pocket there that holds a fragment of a future no one has yet learned to fear. Her hands are precise and unshowy. She speaks with a voice that doesn't cry out to be heard, but requires an audience to listen, to see what she means before she even says it. They move through the city's underbelly, where the authorities' watchful eyes are less a shield and more a trapdoor. The authority doesn't tolerate what it cannot regulate, what it cannot bake into a policy and stamp with a seal. They govern memory, iteration, and the fragile morality of time, with the same care they use to trim the edges of a vinyl record. Treat it gently, or it shatters and everyone hears the crack in every breath. The entangler sits in Ezra's palm. A cube of glass and open questions, wrapped in a lattice of runes that glow faintly when the device is near the right frequencies. It betrayed him once, when he first fled with it, through a security airlock that whispered his name and called him a thief, as if the word itself could become a weapon. The entangler doesn't hum. It, like Ezra, has a stubborn refusal to be completely understood. It rearranges time not with the inevitability of a clock, but with the probability of a dream, the dream you wake from and cannot quite remember where you were when you woke. The night is a storm of illusions. The reality shadows slip across the walls like fish through water, slipping away whenever anyone reaches for them. Ezra and Rana move through a market where vendors sell memories, a cup that once held the warmth of a grandmother's kitchen, a photograph of a rainstorm that never happened, a lullaby whose chords rearrange themselves into different lyrics with every verse. People haggle for moments as if a minute could be bought, traded, or stolen. Some offer to buy back a life they've forgotten, others to sell a future that hasn't yet learned its own name. The air tastes of copper and rain, and something like possibility that's just out of reach. The fracture grows. A streetlight flickers in a rhythm that is almost a pulse, as if the city itself is trying to remember the moment it forgot. The authorities' drones drift overhead, black cylinders that hum with the texture of cold candle wax, scanning for irregularities, for anything that might threaten the time frame they've tattooed into the city's spine. They are patient and inexorable. They do not hurry. They glide. Ezra's plan has always been simple and dangerous: to steal back the memory he never knew he lost by using the entangler to slip past the authorities' safeguards and into the archive of all possible selves. He believes that somewhere inside the tangled fog of his erased past is a version of him who knows the truth of who he is, the kind of truth that can repair a broken identity or, at the very least, reveal the lie it's built upon. Rana's plan is much harder to pin down because it's not just about the device or the timelines. It's about the moral geometry of a choice that could break the city's backbone. They walk into a square where the air trembles with a sound like a low violin string being pulled tight and let go on repeat. A fountain in the middle shivers, its spray bending in ways that shouldn't happen. Arcs becoming bridges between different versions of the same moment. A crowd gathers, not to watch them, but to watch the city watch itself in turn. People blur at the edges, their faces repeating like a glitch in a projector. A man who looks like Ezra. A woman who looks like Rana, both stepping out of the same rumor, both real and not real at once. "Are you sure about this?" Rana asks, keeping her voice low. The words slide along the air, as if they are not meant for human ears, but for the machine that hums under the city's skin. Ezra looks at the Entangler, this gleaming cube that holds the possibility of every possible memory in some form of shimmering faith. "No," he says, and his mouth stiffens into a line. "But we don't have a choice, not if we want to live with ourselves again." Rana nods, not agreeing so much as acknowledging. "There's a line here," she says. "The authority draws a line with a white chalk that doesn't erase easily. If you cross it, you leak. If you don't, you die inside a clock that never stops ticking." She glances toward the drones, the way their composite eyes glitter with a cold, intelligent light. The risk is bigger than the device. It's the humanity that holds the city together. The plane continues toward a place they know well, a ruined observatory that now functions as a liminal hub, the Weave. It's a space where time threads are visible as color and sound. Where you can feel the moment you are sliding out of. It's owned by people who don't own much at all, a community of refugees from other timelines who learn to map the overlaps and survive on the currency of memory. It's here that Ezra intends to open the Entangler in the presence of others who know how to handle the thing without letting it devour them. It's here that Rana must decide whether her loyalty lies with the authority's silence or with Ezra's loud, dangerous need to be someone again. As they approach the Weave, the city seems to tilt, the world leaning to listen. The drums of a distant storm become audible as the air thickens with static. It's the moment when the reality engine, the city's own heart under the cover of 1,000 nights, begins to falter and reboot. The Weave's gate glows in a pale violet that's almost not there, like the color you glimpse only when your eye is closed. Inside the observatory, the Weave hums with a hungry brightness. Air tastes of ozone and old books, of possibility, burning the old rules and writing new ones in their ashes. A council of memory-hardened survivors sits in a ring around the central chamber, each one the living embodiment of a different version of Nyxport. They watch Ezra and Rana approach with wary interest. Some know them as legends consumed by their own stories. Others know them only as whispers in the margins of a map. The central chamber holds the heart of the Entangler in a cradle of glass, a latticework of prismatic threads that whisper when your breath approaches. It is a beautiful thing and a dangerous one, a sculpture of light that trembles as if the room itself is unsure whether to applaud or alarm. "Be careful," warns a woman whose eyes contain the memory of a sunken ship. Her name is Lyra, and her body carries 100 versions of herself stitched together with thread from timelines that never met. She's both ancient and new, a living paradox. She holds a small device like a wristwatch, but when she turns it, a map unfolds on the air in mid-air, lines of causality splitting and recombining, a cartography of paths that once existed and never existed at the same time. The Entangler isn't a key. It's a crack in the door you didn't know existed. If you push too hard, you might open more than you wanted to. Ezra breathes in deeply. The air tastes of metal and rain and something like a promise that time, once broken, might still be repaired with the right kind of courage. He places the cube on a stand in the center of the room, and the room answers by tightening, as if the glass cradle is a bowstring and the Entangler the instrument aimed at the heart of Nyxport. Rana steps closer to the central chamber, her gaze moving from Ezra to the Entangler, to the Weaver's circle of memory-hardened survivors. The Weave's old guard is wary, the new guard hopeful. The authority has sent drones and seals and a back-channel threat, the kind of quiet intimidation that speaks not through words, but through the absence of possibilities. They want the entangler, or at least they want its power contained within their own schedule and moral ledger. We don't have to do this here, Rana says, a calm suggestion that holds the tremor of a lie. We could stash it somewhere safe, wait for a better plan, and abandon the path that will lead us to ruin. The path doesn't wait, Ezra replies. The entangler's runes begin to glow, a soft chorus of luminous threads that feel almost like a language you could listen to if you could listen long enough. If we wait, the fracture will widen until it eats us alive. Lyra's eyes narrow. The fracture already eats you. It eats us all. The authority wants to cut it out, and in cutting it, they might cut out the city's memory of itself. But if you break it open, you might cut away something else, the thing that makes a person who they are. Rana's breath stutters once, a small sound that's almost turned into a cough. We have a choice here, she says, but Ezra sees that she doesn't mean the triage of the city's survival. She means a code of loyalty, a moral map that might not align with the one the authority sees. Ezra's mouth opens as if to answer, but the entangler answers for him. Sings in a chorus that's both music and alarm. It hums with a multicolored static that shivers in the corners of the room, and then, like a patient who has waited long enough, it begins to speak in a voice neither his nor hers, but a composite voice built of all the selves that ever touched it, all the versions of Ezra that could exist in all the times that could be. Listen to me, it says, but not in words you hear, in presences you feel, as a memory you don't quite recognize, like a hand brushing across your shoulder, and you know it belongs to a version of you who lived a life you never lived, who knows something you've forgotten. Listen to me and choose your own memory. The entangler offers you a path to the self you want and to the self you fear losing. Ezra's eyes widen. The memory he has of himself is not a single thing. It's a mosaic of choices and losses, of doors opened and doors slammed. His erased self is not a blank. He is a person who carried a memory so heavy it could sink a ship, a memory of a family he never had, a name he never earned, a purpose he never quite grasped. And yet the memory exists, pressed beneath his skin like a birthmark that refuses to fade. Choose, the entangler says, a phrase that feels less like language and more like gravity shifting. Rana steps forward, her voice a measured risk. If we do this, she says, we accept a future where the authority can never again pretend to be the city's father and mother. She looks around at the circle of memory keepers, their faces lit by a soft, uncertain fire. We change not only the time, but the ethics that govern it. And that's a cost I'm not sure Nyxbord is ready to pay. Lyra nods gravely. The cost is always higher than you think until you're standing inside it. She glances at Ezra, whom she has watched from the edge of a dozen timelines, as if his life were a field she'd learned to read in every possible weather. Ezra's gaze travels from one witness to the next. He doesn't plead. He doesn't threaten. He simply speaks in a tone that isn't loud, but carries the weight of consequences you can't pretend to ignore. The entangler isn't a weapon, he says. Not exactly. It's a memory machine with a conscience. It will give back what was taken from me. Myself, perhaps more, if I can bear the price. If myself returns, perhaps I can remember who I was before a thief took it. And the city won't be a battlefield of identity anymore. Or it will, but in a way we can stand in without crumbling. Rana's eyes flare with a stubborn light. And the price? The city survives, Ezra says. We survive. But some truths will not be pure. They'll be fragile. And the cost of making them stable may be the cost of the future we thought we wanted. The room hums with a resonance that starts as a whisper and swells to a chorus. It is not a negotiation as much as a resonance that shivers along everyone's nerves, a shared memory of what it's like to trade your own sense of self for something bigger, to believe you're saving something by destroying something else. Then let's be honest about the cost, Rana says. The authority will not permit this. If we're going to cross the line, We need a plan that includes exile or revolution, or both. The weave seems to lean closer, as if listening to the gravity of their plan, and approving only if it meets the city's moral measure. The entangler's light stabilizes, then brightens to a white-blue spark that dances along the lattice like a handful of tiny suns. It's a moment of breath in a long story. Ezra inhales, and the city seems to exhale with him. The fracture inside Nixport pulses, and then steadies in a way that feels almost gentle. Almost like the city itself is ready to be born anew, if only for a heartbeat longer than before. Rana steps toward the device, her fingers hovering over the glass case that holds the entangler. She looks at Ezra, a long, searching look that seems to weigh every possible outcome, measuring not just the risk, but the moral weight of the choice she's about to make. She glances at the Weave's council, at Lyra, at the crowd of watchers who call themselves the city's memory. And then she makes a decision. Not here, she says. But her tone is not a demand. It is a plea for a different kind of delay, a pause in the ticking of both clocks and moral circles. We go somewhere else. A place where a decision doesn't decide the city's entire future in one breath. Ezra nods, though he can't hide a certain hunger in his face. The hunger to take back what was taken from him. The hunger to know who he was before the erasure. The hunger to own his name again. Where, he asks. Where time forgets its own rules, Rana says, stepping back and grabbing the entangler's cradle with a careful grip. As though the device itself might slip away if she's not holding it tight enough. There is a corridor between realities, a seam in the weave that's not a door, but a stair. If we move fast enough, we might carry the entangler with us into a version of Nixport that hasn't learned to fear it. The plan is audacious, perhaps even mad enough to work, and certainly dangerous enough to fail. But their path forward seems to widen with a stubborn light, the kind of light that makes you feel you can walk out of a room and into another world if you can only move quickly enough and with the right gravity. In moments, they are moving again, the weave behind them like a living map that folds and unfolds as they push through it. They step into a corridor that feels less like a hallway and more like a bridge between two suns, a seam where one reality ends and another begins. The air grows cooler and the world tilts, and in the tilt the entangler glows brighter, as if it recognizes the new channel as the correct route to the memory it seeks. The corridor is not featureless. It contains echoes of versions of Nixport that never fully became real, fragments of streets that exist on the other side of a boundary. They pass under archways that aren't there in the city's present memory. Walk along a pavement that seems to have grown in the time it took them to cross the threshold, and step into a version of the city that feels familiar and alien at once. The color palette more saturated, the air lighter, the people slightly different, as though you've entered a dream where the faces aren't quite your own. In this other Nixport, it's not an exact replica. It's a possible branch, a branch in which the risk of tyranny hasn't yet become a policy. It's a future in which Ezra's self might exist long enough to be remembered. Rana leads them into a narrow stairwell that seems carved into the air rather than into a wall. Her steps are precise, her breath even, and she never glances back at the entangler to confirm it's safe to proceed. She trusts the corridor as a living thing, and she trusts Ezra not to push the device too far or too fast. They ascend until the stair becomes a ladder of light, and they step onto a rooftop that looks out over a city that glows with an unearthly hue. The hue that accompanies the moment when time chooses a new shape and carries it into the world with all the inevitability of a storm. The city in this version feels more honest, less compromised by fear. The sky is a pale copper color, and the air is clear, with a sweetness that makes you want to cry for happiness you don't quite understand. The river below runs with a clarity it never did in the present Nixport, and along its banks stand trees with leaves like glass, refracting the colors of the city into new shades that seem to come alive and tell stories in the light. "Where are we?" Ezra asks, his voice a soft question to a room that has no walls, only a horizon and a memory of what could be. "Somewhere the authority hasn't found yet," Rana says. "Somewhere we can force a choice without being forced into a choice." Lyra steps beside them, perched on the edge of the rooftop as if she's a bird. Her voice, when it comes, is both old and young at once. "If you can keep the entangler stable here," she says, "you might be able to draw a thread from this version of Nixport and pull it back into the present, until the fracture wears a line into something that resembles a seam rather than a cannon." The entangler's glow shifts, a careful, patient shimmer along its prism. Ezra places his hand on the cradle again, and the device seems to respond to him with a subtle warmth that his own heartbeat can feel. This moment, this breath of the city, caught between two realities, feels like a lull before a storm that's too brave to hide. Rana looks at him with that same taut expression that suggests she's about to tell him something dangerous and true at the same time. She speaks as though naming a truth helps to soften the weight of it. "If we do this here, if we attempt to pull a piece of this Nixport into our own, we'll be taking responsibility for a future that hasn't yet earned the right to exist," she says. "We'll be accountable to neither the authority nor the city's present self. We'll be accountable to the memory of what could have been." Ezra nods again. He's quiet for a long moment, listening to the distant hum of a storm somewhere beyond the copper sky, listening to the memory of a self he hasn't even allowed to come fully forward yet. The entangler's runes glow, bright as the core of a star, then soften to a careful glow, an invitation rather than a command. "Let me test it," he says at last. The words come with a calm confidence that's earned through long nights and shorter, sharper pains. "If I can access the memory I want without losing the rest of me, we can decide what to do with the memory later. If I can't, I'll stop. I'll walk away and you can leave with the device. We can pretend this wasn't the moment we decided the city's future would depend on a gamble." Rana's mouth tightens in a line that doesn't quite look like a smile. "That's a dare," she says, almost amused, almost weary. "Not a plan." "Plans," Lyra says, "began with a dare and ended with a choice that could shatter what you were trying to protect. If you go forward, you must know that the memory you retrieve may surface as a new version of you that is braver or more wrecked than you intend. You may become a hero or a ghost. The weight of that line sits in the air between them, heavy as the gravity that tugs at a planet's core." Ezra looks at Rana and sees the decision etched in the lines of her face, the choice of a lifetime, the line beyond which she cannot step back without stepping away from something she believes in more than herself. "Do it," Rana says softly at last. "Do it here, where time isn't yet a tool of control, but a possibility. If we're to remake a life, let us begin with the life that matters most, yours." Ezra's chest tightens. He lifts his gaze to the entangler, to the crease of light along its edges, where the forgotten self waits, like a patient, heavy prayer, at the center of a ruined cathedral. He takes a breath that tastes of rain and the clean, sharp scent of a future that could be, and he presses his palm to the cradle's glass. The entangler awakens with a chorus of harmonics that seems to fill the rooftop with a soft, aching beauty. The memory that answers is not a name, not a place, but a feeling, a memory that Ezra recognizes even though he hasn't learned to name it. It's the moment when you realize you are not the person you thought you were. It's the moment when you remember the exact weight of a choice you once refused to bear. The memory floods him, a childhood in a home that never truly existed in his present, a father's voice that spoke in the tone of a warning and a promise at once, a sister who smiled with a light that was almost cruel because it came from a future she would never know. He sees himself younger, a version of him who did not yet learn to question the world, who believed that the right thing to do was always the thing that would protect what you had left. He reaches for that memory with a sense of longing that hurts, as if the memory itself could open the wound in his chest that still bleeds with the ache of a life that could have been. And then the memory becomes something more than a memory. It becomes a life, one with a different name, a different history, a different set of scars. The world around him shifts, colors tilt, the copper sky grows brighter, and the river's surface mirrors a dawn he hasn't earned but can now claim. The version of Ezra who steps forward from the memory is older in the sense that he has lived longer, but younger in the sense that he carries less of the fear that once kept him from grabbing onto what is his. The new Ezra looks at Rana with an expression that is both grateful and unsettled. He has not replaced the old him, he has joined with him, a merger of two selves whose borders were never real to begin with. Who have learned to survive by borrowing each other's courage. Rana sees the change in him and knows what it implies. The Entangler's glow intensifies, then steadies into a pulse that rings through the rooftop like a single clear bell. Not just a memory, Ezra says, his voice lower than usual, as if his lungs were filling with a denser air. It's a person who existed in a place where I didn't exist. And if I claim him, I'll be different, but I'll also be real. Real enough to bear the weight of a choice that could end you and the city, Lyra says, her tone both admonition and approval. You'll be asked to carry not only your memory, but the memory of that other life's consequences. Ezra looks at Rana, and in her eyes he reads the answer he sought for a long time but never dared to voice aloud. The city's future may call for a betrayal, not of people, but of the past that taught them to fear what they could become. Rana steps closer, and her own resolve seems to harden into a path she's prepared to walk, but did not want to walk alone. If we do this, she says, we do it with the knowledge that the authority will not permit a second moment of choice like this, and will come to gather what we've collected. We need a plan that won't leave a roadblock in our wake, a plan that won't leave Nixport to rot from the inside out. Ezra regards her with a patient gravity that only someone who has spent a lifetime bending time can muster. We should not need to outpace the authority forever, he says, using the old rough phrasing of a person who learned to survive in the margins. We need to outpace the fear of what's next if we can survive the next hour. We'll be in a position to dictate the terms by which time can be negotiated. The Weave's memory keepers murmur, a chorus of voices that is both a caution and a hope. The plan forms slowly, like a sculpture emerging from stone as water seeps through the porous rock. They will not confront the authority head-on here. That would be suicide. They will instead pull a thread from the future version of Nixport and weave it into the present to force a moment in which the city sees itself differently, long enough to act. They will stage a demonstration, a proof of concept, a shift in perception that the authority cannot ignore. The first step is to draw a boundary around the Entangler, a temporary shield of time that isolates its most dangerous capabilities from the city's fragile present. The second step is to create a narrow corridor within which Ezra's newly gained memory can inhabit his new body without erasing the old one completely, a spiritual and existential space where the two versions of Ezra can learn to share a single life, rather than convert the life of one into the ruin of the other. The third step is to broadcast a version of the city's memory to all who will listen, the Weave's version of a newsfeed, showing that a different temporal orientation exists, one in which people can own their memories without losing their humanity to the clock. The plan is risky, but the risk is not abstract. It has a name and a face, the authority, and it has a leadership that has grown tiresome with its habit of speaking for a city that doesn't always want to be spoken for. The plan requires one thing more, a choice Rana must choose whether to sustain the plan by staying within the Weave or to step outside, to walk away from the Entangler and the chance to reclaim Ezra's erased self, and to accept the cost of a city that must live with a memory it didn't ask for but now needs to survive. The choice stares at them in the starlit horizon of the other Nixport, the city that exists when the lines between realities are thin enough to touch. In this horizon, the wind carries the scent of rain and old paper, the way a library smells when you've opened a book you shouldn't have, but couldn't resist. It is a future that could be real if they can bear to claim it. They exchange a breath, not words, and then Ezra steps forward toward the Entangler, a quiet figure against a world that grows brighter with each heartbeat. "Let us begin," he says, and the word can be a vow or a dare, or possibly both. The first move is delicate, a careful separation of the Entangler from the city's feed, a lock that glitters and then locks in place. The second move is a thread of memory that Ezra carries forward into his new self, the one who will claim his name and his history, not as a hollow echo, but as a living thing with weight and tone and the rough terrain of a life fully lived. The third move is Rana's decision to stay within the plan's frame, to walk into the space of the Weave's future and keep one eye on the authorities' reaction, another on Ezra, and a third on the possibility of the city's own memory becoming stronger than any policy. As the plan takes hold, the world around them trembles, not violently, but with a shivering tremor that feels almost like a yawn, the city waking from a long dream and realizing it's been dreaming for a long time, realizing that its dreams could be changed if it listened to a few brave voices and allowed the memory of a life to remain within a person long enough to become a new self. A clock somewhere in the city's far edge tolls, a sound that becomes a thread in the air rather than a bell. The toll is not the hour, but the moment when the Weave's field pulses with a brighter, more honest light. In that moment, the fracture in Nixport fractures again, but this time not into chaos, but into a more navigable network of possibilities. The clock's sound ripples through the air, and people who have been living with an unsure memory feel a jolt of recognition, as if a map has appeared in their mind's eye, a map that leads not to a ruin, but to a doorway. Ezra, now standing at the edge of the Entangler's cradle, breathes in the electricity of this sudden alignment. His memory, this newly claimed self, carries something deeper than personal recollection. It carries the sense that he is part of a larger story, a story that includes not only him, but the city, the memory keepers, Rana, Lyra, and the names of all the people who have chosen to step into this seam in time, to fight for a future that isn't merely survival, but a form of living. Rana's eyes search for his, then find them, steady and clear. She speaks not to him, but to the room and to the city about to wake. "We don't know what this will cost us, yet," she says, "but we can feel what it might save." If Nixport can learn to live with the knowledge that memory can be both a shield and a weapon, then maybe the authority will be forced to redefine what it means to protect a city. The Entangler's glow brightens, and the room seems to tilt again, as if the world itself is listening to a speech not yet given. The memory Ezra merged with surfaces of himself begins to settle into a rhythm, the new pulses of a heart that knows both the old fear and the new courage. A heart that knows what it means to reclaim a self and to do so not as an act of revenge, but as a duty to the people who need him to be fully present. The memory's re-entry is not dramatic, it's quiet, almost gentle. The newly formed Ezra does not throw open the doors of a past life with a gleeful roar. Instead, he steps forward with a careful human gaze and asks Rana to stand with him, not as a collaborator in a risky plan, but as a partner who has chosen to risk everything for something bigger than the two of them. He introduces himself, not as the man who once disappeared, but as the man who has learned to carry his past with him, to carry other people's past with him, and to use both to guide a future where memory is a right and not a weapon. A crowd around them, people who've learned to drift between realities for survival, feel a change in the air. It's not fear or relief so much as a dawning comprehension. The city's past can be used to shape its future if those who know how to bend time choose to bend it with care. They are witnessing a first act in a new kind of governance, one that embraces memory as a living system rather than a registry to be controlled. The authority marches toward them with a slow inevitability, its drones hovering, its seals ready, its banners stiff with the old policies that cannot admit the city's new possibilities. The leader of the authority, a stern figure who has learned to wear calm like armor, steps into the light and regards Ezra, Rana, and the Entangler with a gaze that is at once calculating and almost curious. Your actions here, the leader says, have disrupted a fragile balance. You've stolen from time itself and given to it in the form of a gift. You've reshaped the memory of a city and the identity of a man who is not a tool, but a citizen. The words are measured, a legalese that is both elegant and hollow in a moment of truth that cannot be undone. Ezra looks at the leader, then past the leader, toward the horizon where Nixport glows with the light of a city that is now a map of possibilities rather than a map of constraints. He knows that this moment can become a turning point or a failure of humanity's courage. It depends on what happens next, on the decisions they make when the world is watching, when the memory of the moment is as fragile as a glass statue left in the rain. We did not steal what belonged to us, Ezra says, his voice quiet but clear. We reclaimed a self that was stolen from us, not by a person, not by a policy, but by a fear that time would erase us. If a city can survive that fear, it deserves to be allowed to live as something more than a policy violation. Rana steps forward, the Entangler cradled in her arms as if it is a newborn, delicate, dangerous, utterly necessary. We've shown that memory isn't simply a record of what happened. It's a living field that can be shaped to protect what matters. The truth that a person isn't their worst moment, or the moment someone stole from them. The truth is not a chain, it's a rope you can pull to pull others toward you. She glances at the authorities' leader with a new certainty in her gaze. If the city is going to survive the future, it needs the memory to be used honestly, not confiscated as if it were a weapon. The authorities' leaden silence stretches, a hinge between the old order and something else, something uncertain and dangerous but hopeful. Then the leader nods. Not in surrender, but in recognition of a truth that cannot be dismissed. If memory can be wielded as a shield, perhaps it can also be wielded as a beacon. The standoff dissolves, not into fireworks, but into a mutual acknowledgement that something has shifted. The city's heartbeat seems to catch in its throat, the air heavy with the possibility that time can be changed for the better, and that people can choose to be more than what their circumstances demanded. Ezra and Rana step back from the Entangler. The device's glow dims to a soft, patient shimmer. It has done its work, or at least enough of it, to show a path forward. The Weave's memory keepers close ranks, their faces now a blend of caution and cautious triumph. Lyra's smile is a rare thing, a spark that seems to make the night brighter in the way that the truth sometimes does. The city doesn't instantly revert to a perfect baseline. It doesn't snap back to a textbook of reality where every moment is accounted for and every memory sits safely in its proper place. It does, however, gain something rarer. A shared sense that time is not merely a resource to be taxed or controlled, but a living system to be tended. There will be consequences, of course. There always are. But for the first time in a long time, Nixport feels like a city that can choose what kind of future to remember. Ezra's newly integrated self looks at Rana with something like a tender gravity, a recognition that the risk was worth it, not simply for the memory he reclaimed, but for the bond that was forged in the crucible of danger and doubt. If there's a score to be settled with the past, Ezra has chosen to settle it with courage rather than revenge. If there's a city to be saved, he's chosen to stay and fight for its sovereignty as more than a policy. Rana's face softens, a quiet victory shining through the lines of strain and fatigue. She has made a choice that contains within it both a betrayal and a loyalty. A betrayal of a fearsome, controlling regime that would reduce life to a ledger, and a loyalty to a future in which people like Ezra aren't erased for convenience. Where their stories are kept intact, but not weaponized, the authority departs with a measured dignity that is almost respectful in its refusal to concede with fanfare. They leave behind a warning in the form of a slowed drone's taillight, and a promise that the city's memory will be watched, not because the city is dangerous, but because some memories are too potent to leave entirely in the hands of any single entity. The city will be watched, but it will be watched with the understanding that Nixport has grown beyond a battlefield and toward a standing ground, a place where time can be negotiated rather than stolen. In the hours that follow, Nixport begins to breathe differently. The clocks still melt in the rain, and the storm still erupts somewhere distant. But the city's people, those who remember more than one possible past and more than one possible future, start to act as if they own the moment again. They tell stories not to erase fear, but to incorporate courage, to calibrate memory, the way they calibrate engines, with precise hands and careful breaths. Ezra and Rana walk the city's newly tuned streets, a pair who have learned to carry a heavy truth without letting it crush them. The entangler rests in a secure cradle within the weave, a symbol of power that has neither been discarded nor worshipped, but acknowledged, an instrument that will be used only when necessary, and never again as a weapon, but as a tool for healing. For making connections between people who glimpsed a future that frightened them into compliance and people who chose not to let fear decide their fate. The city's mind begins to change. The idea that identity is fixed, the old assumption that one loss equals one life, drifts away. In its place grows a more humane understanding that identity can be a conversation between a person and their possibilities, that memory can be a garden tended by the living rather than a mausoleum curated by the dead. The line between reality and memory becomes thinner, yes, but the line's purpose shifts from imprisonment to invitation. People begin to remember who they could become, and they begin to choose that version of themselves with the same seriousness with which they used to fear. In the weeks after the Weave's subtle revolution, Nixport becomes a living laboratory for time, a place where memory and moment are braided rather than opposed. Ezra does not pretend the past never existed. He does not pretend his erased self never mattered. He carries both with him as if they were two lungs. They breathe together, and he learns to speak in a voice that can fuse both histories into something true. He learns not to fight fear with denial, but to coax it with honesty, to tell it that it does not own him, that he owns his own breath and his future. Rana's role in this new story continues to grow. She's no longer a solitary figure who calculates risks from the shadows. She becomes a guide who helps others see that they too have a seat at the Weave's table, that their memories are not jars to be sealed, but springs to be tapped when needed. She remains a guardian of the city's future, fiercely protective and deeply hopeful, a reminder that innovation without mercy is a tyranny all its own. The Entangler's presence remains a careful case study for Nixport's historians, and a warning to those who would wield time as a tool of domination. It's a thing to be kept safe, but not hidden away. It's a reminder that power, even the power to reclaim a life, must be guarded by a code that the city can bear, the code of responsibility to others, who do not share the same memory, the same history, the same fear. On a night that smells faintly of rain and something like old libraries, Ezra stands on the Weave's rooftop, looking out over a city that seems to glow more softly, more truthfully than it used to. The river's surface now shines with the reflected light of a dozen possible dawns, and for the first time in a long time, he allows himself to believe that this is not a dream or a heist or a fantasy of a man who wanted to be someone else. It is a city that has decided to be itself, imperfect, true, and alive to the risk of being human. Rana joins him, their shoulders almost touching, as if they've learned to share a horizon rather than a life divided by distance. They don't speak for a while, letting the night fill with the soft, patient music of a world that has learned to breathe in 3 or 4 different tempos at once. Finally, Ezra speaks, not loud, but with the kind of quiet certainty that changes the weather in a room. "We saved a memory," he says, the words the simplest and most astonishing to hear. "We saved a life that almost forgot to be alive." "We saved more than a memory," Rana replies. "We created a future worth stepping into." The city agrees with a gentle, almost inaudible murmur that runs through the air as if Nixport itself has exhaled a sigh of relief. The night seems to listen. The rain, still present, still necessary, begins to fall in a way that feels like cleansing rather than washing away. The fractures in the city don't vanish, but they become seams, not wounds. They are the places where time can be bent to heal rather than broken to destroy. And as they stand there together, Ezra, Rana, and the city, there is a moment of shared memory and shared hope that says they will continue to fight, not just to survive, but to build a life that can hold all its truths without breaking, to honor every version of themselves that was brave enough to show up for the truth. If you listen closely, you can hear a soft chorus rise from the streets, people telling stories, remembering names, and choosing to keep walking forward, one heartbeat at a time. The city's lifeblood is no longer simply the current moment, but the chorus of moments that came before and those that lie ahead, braided into a single, stubborn, luminous path. The night holds them, the weave cradles them, and Nixport, though forever a city where reality and memory flirt with danger, stays awake, ready for whatever future they decide to claim next.